I just don't feel good either. Hello, Jana.
Hi.
We are talking today about what to do when you struggle with repurposing.
Yeah, content repurposing in
And
particular.
we want to give the viewers a bit of an um, caveat here. I have been sick. I got a cold last week, so I'm not all here. And also, Jana's got a hurricane bearing down on Florida. So if you hear
Wix gives you the free.
my computer also updated itself last night and it's doing completely random things and I don't know what it's doing.
Yeah, so I'm
Apparently,
safe.
Wix has an ad in our.
Yeah. I just want to say
Tell
I'm
us about
safe.
your
We
tell us
don't
about
have a
your
hurricane. The hurricane's not literally bearing down on us right now. I'm safe. We're not even really right in the direct path. We're on the east coast of Florida and it's going to hit the west coast. We will probably lose power as it comes across the state, but that's not happening right now. Like everything's safe right now. I just want to let people know that. So
good.
yeah, I mean, it's like this is the calm before the storm a little bit here. So, but
Literally.
my alarm, the house alarm keeps telling me there's like a tornado in Miami, which is far away from here. And my dog is like watching everybody and barking out the window as everybody's walking by and like bringing supplies in and out and stuff. So it's a little bit of a wild and woolly day here, but you know, we we go on. The show goes on. The show must go on.
Literally. Even with the Wix interruptions and Heather being sick, I'm so behind, guys. I'm like drowning in work. But that's all right. So we're chatting about what to do when you struggle with content repurposing this week. And Jenna has a few things that she wants to start with, and then we're just gonna kind of do our normal ping pong thing.
Okay.
Ping pong, bing bong.
Yeah. So we want to focus mostly on like the practical things you can do. But there are some mindset things around repurposing too, which is like almost a whole other conversation, but we'll touch on them a little bit.
Mhm.
I think the number one reason, and I think back to our clubhouse days when I think about this topic a lot, because I remember I used to run, not in our club, although sometimes we did it in our club too, but a content repurposing room on Wednesdays, and people would come to the room and they would listen to like all of my suggestions. And sometimes we'd have people come to stage and talk about how they repurpose their content. And it was always so interesting to me that so many people said they struggled with content repurposing because it should be easy, right? It should be something that we don't only do it because it's easy. We do it because it actually makes sales. Like repetition in your content is actually what you need to make sales. Repeating your content over and over again doesn't make you boring. It makes you money. That's the that's the idea. But the secondary reason we do it is because it should make things easier and save you time. So you're not always reinventing the wheel and constantly having to churn out brand new content. But so many people find it really hard. And there are a few patterns that I noticed. The number one thing that I noticed that I want to talk about is that a lot of people are sort of trying to get blood from a stone when it comes to repurposing, in the sense that they're like, when they think of repurposing, they're trying to go to an Instagram caption that they wrote and repurpose that into another Instagram caption, or into a post for Threads or something like that. And it's not that that can't work. It can, but a lot of times I think the reason why people have a hard time content repurposing is because they didn't start with long form content that is juicy and detailed and what's the opposite of flimsy? Like substantive and has a lot of little gems in it here and there that you can pull
Um,
out. And so the number one thing, and I know no one who knows me is going to be shocked by this because you all know that I believe strongly in, and Heather does too, in having a foundation for your content of long form content because it converts faster. But also for this reason, because it's easy to repurpose. The number one thing I think people can do to make content repurposing easier is invest the time in creating high converting long form content. And the way that I teach it, you don't have to always be creating more and more and more long form content. Inside my program, High Leverage Content, we just create 12 to 20 pieces of high converting, very intentional long form content. And then we stop and we repurpose it and we reuse it in all different ways on repeat. So it does take a little bit of work up front and in time investment up front to create that library of content that is long form that now you'll be able to dip into every time you want to repurpose content. But once you have it, it's like everything becomes so much magically, easier when it comes to repurposing because you're no longer trying to get blood from a stone. You're not taking a short caption and trying to turn it into something else or like three other things. If you write a long form blog post that has a lot of good detail in it, it's almost like unlimited, but you can easily get, 40, 50 pieces of short form content from it. You don't have to get that many. I just want to make sure we talk about that too at some point because that can be a little bit of a mindset shift, like getting stuck thing too, is like you think that you need to be doing more when you don't necessarily need to be doing more, but you could easily do that. Like it's easy to pull all of those gems and those pieces out of it in a way that is not as easy and sometimes bordering on impossible if you have short form content only to dip into to repurpose. So my number one thing for people who struggle with content repurposing, actually just getting it done and doing it, and like, why is this not as easy as everybody says it is to make sure you have that library of long form content. So, and I know Heather, you'll probably agree with me because you have a similar philosophy and content ecosystem with your long form content in your business. But I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's like a thing that gets in people's way?
I think, yes, you have to have long form content in order to repurpose and get everything out that you want to get out. I don't think like you can do light repurposing. And honestly, there's this kind of
Exactly.
philosophy I've been like jumbling around in my mind from a gal I found on Threads. And she uses this thought process, and I'd love your thoughts on it. Her name's Amber Figlow. She uses repurpose, recycle, reuse
Yep.
is like her strategy for like taking one YouTube video and making it all like putting it everywhere.
Right.
So I think a lot of people reuse content, especially from like Instagram or TikTok or YouTube shorts, and they think they're actually repurposing it. Whereas I don't actually look at repurposing content that way. I,
Mhm.
I look at it as like reusing it elsewhere, but repurposing for me is really powerful with a long form YouTube video, like what you're saying, having long form content, YouTube, podcast, blog, then taking gems from that, like you mentioned, and spinning that into new, smaller pieces of content. That's truly repurposing for me. And that's where I get hung up. And I'll
Okay.
tell you why I get hung up. And other people probably can
Relate.
relate. It's the system. I have a lack of system in place for doing it. And then for a long time, I had a lack of tools in place of doing it. I have the tools in place now. I just need to create like the workflow. I've also
Mhm.
created the system. So my system's in ClickUp now. I just have to create the workflow, and that actually just means investing time into that task. So what I'm going to be doing next year to make this more powerful is actually invite my team into the process.
Mhm.
I'm going to have Sonia help me out. She's my video editor. I'm gonna have her basically like editing the little short form videos in Riverside for me.
Oh, good.
What are the best clips that we can use out of this YouTube video? Because she edited it.
Mhm.
What are the best clips in Riverside that we can use? Now, Riverside will do the magic AI part, but I've noticed that Riverside actually chooses stuff that I wouldn't want to share as short form video clips. It's
Mhm.
like really low quality parts
It's
of the
just
video.
it's not
Yeah.
picking out the right
It's like
things. Okay.
an
Mhm.
outro or something. It doesn't actually make any sense.
Mm.
So then using their editor to do that, but then choosing more strategic parts of the video. So having
Mhm.
Sonia maybe do some of that part.
Okay.
Like get it 90% of the way there, and then I come in and finish the final like touches and publish
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I'm going to make a note on my computer, on my notepad here to come back to the idea of AI because there's obviously tons of ways we can use AI for this too. So yeah, that makes sense. And I like your acknowledgement too. Like the way I think about it is that repurpose, that word is kind of like an umbrella.
Yeah.
And underneath repurpose, you have all these ways to repurpose. You can reuse. I think of reusing as one way to repurpose, but not the only way.
Yeah.
And that would be like reposting, like using the same thing again. Like, this performed well on Instagram a month or maybe 3 months ago. So no, I'm just literally going to repost the exact same thing. Right. Or maybe you repost the
Yeah.
exact same thing with a slight variation, like a different image or slightly different image or whatever, different call to action, right? There's different ways to do that. Then there's like recycling and even upcycling. If you think about it that way, like an like a analogy with like furniture. And taking, I think what you're
Yeah.
talking about is really powerful, where you're taking this idea that you already explored in a piece of content and you're thinking about kind of almost like piggybacking on that idea and like what other things kind of are basically the same idea, but a little bit of a different either twist on it or different things that I want to talk about that I'm inspired by this piece of content to talk about. That's almost like an upcycling, and it's a more sophisticated kind of way of repurposing. But just the acknowledgement that there's all different ways to repurpose is really important. And I know a lot of people do start to
Yeah.
feel a little bit like if you're the kind of person who's like an all or nothing kind of person, like a completist, like if you feel like you can't do it all, you're not going to do any of it, then you might think to yourself, like, oh, well, Jana says you can get like 50
Yeah.
pieces of content out of a blog post. So, but I only got three, and so I'm not going to do it at all. Like, don't think that way. Like, you need to get out of that thinking. You need to think like, if you take a piece of a blog post, and actually next week we're going to be doing one of those live videos where we take a blog post and we like show how we turned it into a bunch of different pieces of content. So if anyone wants to see that, that's what we're talking about next week. But there are times when I take a blog post and I turn it into 10 or 15 or 20 pieces and I schedule them out. But there are also times when I don't have the time to do that and I'll just take three or four things out of it and go ahead and schedule that out and be happy with it and then move on to the next thing. Like you don't have to be a completist. You don't have to feel like if you don't have time to turn a blog post into 50 pieces of content for all these different platforms, then you're like, you're a loser and you're not doing it right. Like don't feel that way because that's going to keep you really, really stuck. Um, and what I really like, one of the things I like too about the way I teach it, and obviously I like it because I do it this way in my own business, so this is how I teach it, is mentally speaking, like when I have a blog post and I turn it into three pieces and I know there's a lot more I could get out of it, I'm okay with that because I also know that in a few months, I'll probably circle back to that same blog post and create new pieces from that one. I don't just publish something and then forget about it and never go back to it because we only publish 12 to 20 pieces of content in HLC and then we stop. You're always going back to your old pieces and reusing those again to repurpose, upcycle, all that kind of stuff. So it's almost like when you're like in a city, like you're in Paris and you're like, oh my God, I want to go to all of the museums, but you only have time for three. And you say to yourself, well, we'll have to come back. It's a good excuse to come back because we didn't see all the museums.
Yeah.
Same kind of concept. You'll come back to this blog post later and you'll repurpose more from it. So don't worry, just do what you want to do right now and then, and then move on. But um, so I don't know if that's part of your thinking and what gets you stuck is like,
Yes.
I can't do everything with it. So I'm just like, oh, throwing my hands up and being like frustrated that like I didn't get all I could from this blog post or this YouTube video.
Lately, that has been my problem in the past. And lately, I've actually been saying, you know what? I'm just going to make, for right now, I'm going to make one thread, one LinkedIn post. Those are actually the same. I make one thread, duplicate it, make it a LinkedIn post.
Yep.
And then I pull that blog post into Tailwind. I make Pinterest pins and I push a Facebook post out. And going forward, I just have to develop some sort of workflow or
Hmm.
strategy for this. I want to make some sort of feed post on Instagram, reusing the caption from Threads or LinkedIn. So kind of
Hmm.
repurposing that caption, but making a different image
Hmm.
and then pushing more people from Instagram. I
Hmm.
used to have all the time in the world on Tuesdays to do all of this. And as the agency has, slowed down, but then's really sped up, and then the membership has grown, I've just not been able to prioritize that as much. So this is really where, as we come back to the conversation about I want to lean more into using some AI to help me create those captions where
Hmm.
I can, finesse them a little bit into more my language.
Hmm.
And um, yeah,
Yeah.
spend less time on it because
Yeah.
AI is helping me more.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Okay. So I don't know which way. So one way I want to go with this is into another thing, which is using your team. So if you have a team, it's great to be
Mhm.
able to use them for repurposing. And again, this is another argument for having long form content that you've invested time and love into, because that way, when they go to repurpose, they have something to repurpose. A lot of people try to have team repurpose, but they don't, again, have that long form content that really has all the details and juice that they can like squeeze out of it. And then you end up with a team who's kind of making stuff up instead of just grabbing your own words and the things that you already put your seal of approval on. I had a student inside of
Yeah.
HLC named Naomi who joined, and within like 30 days, she had written her entire suite of content. That's a little out of the ordinary. Most people who join HLC don't write everything in the first 30 days. They usually take, a few
Oh,
months,
that's a
several
lot.
months, maybe even a year to write all their pieces of content. But the goal is once you get to the point where you have that 12 or 20, you don't have to keep writing every month. You can, just start using just recycling. And actually, we repurpose way before 12 or 20. I usually
Yeah.
recommend repurposing after you publish your first 4 pieces. But she published all of hers, and then she hired a content repurposing VA to start creating all her LinkedIn content. So every month now, that content repurposing VA is creating all her LinkedIn content and getting it out there. So again, that's the argument for long form content. It's easier to delegate repurposing and
Yeah.
any kind of content and social media or anything when you have that library. Um, and then getting back to AI, that was definitely like something that I wanted to talk about. I just have this feeling, Heather, and you know, I don't know that AI is really saving us so much time when it comes to repurposing, because you
Yeah.
still are, changing up the language and everything. And I love AI for repurposing and I'm using it. But I think, again, when you have your own long form
Mhm.
content and you can copy and paste pieces out of it, it's not, you don't have to be using AI to do your repurposing. You can actually just be taking
Yeah.
pieces from your long form content that are in the words you already wrote in the way you wanted to present the information and reuse that too. So combination is good, but
Yeah.
how are you planning to incorporate AI into your content repurposing? Just like plugging in, like saying like,
Um,
how are you going to like plugging in something and saying like, can you break this down into like 5 different posts, or is that what you're thinking?
yeah. Yeah. And then what I was having it do is I was prompting it to give me like 5 options for LinkedIn posts of my words or content,
Hmm.
just recapture some of it and break it down into
Hmm.
snippets, basically. So taking that and just asking it for like, give me options for LinkedIn, give me options for threads, and then I give it like the character count I want it to stick within.
Yeah.
Um, and then for Instagram specifically, I would like to use some AI to help me to draft some carousel posts
Hmm.
for Instagram. And maybe this isn't every single YouTube video I put out. Maybe this is
Right.
like the main video for the month, kind of like
Right.
what you and I were talking about with my new content strategy going forward next year.
Yep.
Taking like one pillar piece of content for the month and making that a carousel.
Yep.
And like max posting on Instagram like 4 times a month. I don't want to be
Hmm.
posting every day,
Right. Right.
like maybe once a week. And then whenever we have other things that we want to promote, be promoting those as well. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yep.
that's what I
And
was thinking.
yeah, that makes sense. And I just realized too that in your repurposing ecosystem, you're taking a transcript and repurposing it into
Mhm.
a carousel. And that's a little different than taking a blog post and repurposing it into a carousel. Now, I know you create blog posts for not all, but most of your YouTube videos.
About
So it might
70%.
make
Yeah.
sense to take the blog post that you create and then turn that into a carousel, because then it's like it might be a quicker, like a shorter distance for the AI to have to take you than from a
Yeah.
transcript. But could try the transcript. I'm very curious to know how that works, if it gives you an output that is close enough to what you want that you end up spending less time than you would just like, writing out some slides for a carousel and handing them to your team to put into the carousel
Yeah.
format or whatnot.
The problem is we're still so far behind, even all these years later, on blog posts for the YouTube videos. I
Hmm.
did a YouTube video on how to create Pinterest pins for physical products, and the blog post just went live. And the YouTube video on that probably went live 6+ months ago.
Hmm.
So we're so far behind. And that's something that is also broken in my system that makes repurposing from the blogs really hard.
Hmm.
So I need to actually take my content manager off of all the backlog of content and have her only working on what needs to go out this week.
Today, right? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one strategy. I also would suggest to anyone who's listening, and maybe this helps you, Heather, and maybe it helps other people too, is like maybe reframe what you're feeling about whether you're behind. Like in the sense that like, do you need to have a blog post for all your videos? Like, would it be okay if some of them don't have them? And now
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like maybe the backlog you have, there's only 6 that really need to be blog posts, and in your mind you're thinking it's like 20, but it's really just 6 that you absolutely need to have as blog posts. Like we don't I think that's again that's
Yeah.
that like that's that like that voice in our head, the hobgoblin of consistency, where, or what is it? Consistency is the
Yeah.
hobgoblin or something like that, where we want it to be consistent, but like at the end of the day, we do have limited time, limited resources, limited team. And if you're a really prolific content creator, which you are, content repurposing might seem harder if you're expecting yourself to repurpose every single thing.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe it's like you only
And
repurpose
definitely,
things that meet a certain standard or something like that, for you, for you.
there's definitely things in here that I don't think necessarily need blog posts.
Hmm.
I think it could be interesting to have blog posts for some of these, like how to connect your Instagram account to Pinterest.
Hmm.
That's actually going to be a blog post and it'll probably be live by the end of the week.
Hmm.
Um, but like, and this question of like how often can you pin the same URL,
Hmm.
that doesn't need to be its own blog post. That just needs to go in the complete Pinterest marketing strategy blog post as
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
H2. And I can insert the video for that right inside that section that I made.
Hmm.
So I think you're right. Some of these probably could just be, um, using tag topics on Pinterest. That doesn't need to be its own blog post. That can again go into how to optimize your Pinterest pins with the native scheduler.
Right, right. Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right in that I need to have a more, heavy conversation with myself about what really truly does need to happen here.
Yeah, because then you can get your brain to stop saying like, oh, we're so behind on this and just say like, we're not that behind. We're just going to start, keeping up with everything present moving forward. And we have a little project on our plate that, maybe gets outsourced or something to take these six that really need to go onto the blog and get them onto the blog in the background or something.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but to sort of relate it to what our viewers might be thinking, I just think this is an example of like the way this might show up for our viewers if they're not as prolific content creators as you, because you're very prolific, more than I am, for example. The way this might show up for our viewers is they write a blog post and they feel like they need to create 50 posts, and you don't. Just create three and then move on and know that you'll come back and visit Paris again and see all the other museums next time.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to feel like, you're either doing all of it or it's not worth doing any of it.
Yeah.
Because it is, you're like right now, you might not be doing all of it, but you're doing a lot of it, Heather. And that's awesome. Like your blog's
So
like rocks
much.
because of that. So
Yeah, it's honestly like to your point, it's nice to have separate blog posts for some things, but we probably don't need standalone blog posts for things
Mhm.
like using tag topics or Pinterest pin formats. Like those things can truly be sandwiched into other blogs and it would be fine. And then I can
Mhm.
take that blog once it's updated and do some more light repurposing on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that also helps Google. Google loves updated content. Then we're updating our content more often instead of creating
Right.
brand new content every single time.
Right. That's true too. Yeah.
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 Okay. Um,
Thanks.
another,
Thanks for helping me work through that.
yeah, for sure. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about with it? I was going to move to the next thing, but I don't want to plow over
No,
your,
go ahead.
okay. So I wanted to share a couple of tactical things that I think people might
Mhm.
be able to use if repurposing
Yep.
is feeling hard. So the first tactical thing I wanted to share is a framework that I teach inside of high leverage content called the gem pull and the straight teaser. And the way that I teach this inside HLC is when you publish a blog post, or when you haven't published a blog post, you can always go back to an older one because we always want to be resharing all the blog posts we write in HLC. That's how it works. You can go to any blog post,
Yeah.
whether it's one you just published or one from the past, and pull out like two gems and two straight teasers. That's how I like to do it, or one straight teaser and two gems. And that can be a really easy framework for finding the parts of the blog post that are worth repurposing and resharing. Because I know for me, it's easy for me to identify those things. For you, it is. We've trained our brains to do that. But sometimes
Yeah.
the reason why it feels hard is because people aren't sure what parts to share. Um, so first of all, the straight teaser, and I use a little carrot emoji to kind of talk about this,
I mean, it's
is,
crazy to think about.
oh, hello, where you're you're cracking me up over there. Um,
My computer did it
this
again. I
has like
don't
a
know
mind
what's
of its
happening.
own. It's like, I'm gonna play this. There's like a ghost in your computer. Um, okay, so the straight
Scared me.
teaser, the the goal of the straight teaser is to get people to read the whole blog. But we're repurposing part of the blog as like the promo content for the blog post. So a lot of times you can, everything okay? A lot of times you can find these phrases in the introduction for your blog post, or in the in the conclusion of your blog post. So in HLC, one of the things that I teach, and you don't have to be stiff when you do this, but it is good to kind of think about it this way a little bit. In the HLC strategic outlines that I have inside the program, there's 9 of them, one to correspond with each of the main types of content we create in HLC. There's these content, sorry, I'm all over the place now because I'm like watching you. Okay, there's these outlines, right? And so a lot of times what we're
sorry, I'm
doing.
having a bit of anxiety.
Oh, are you all right? Okay. All right. So one of the ways that we think about this is like how we learned how to write essays in school, where you're going to tell them what you are going to tell them, which is kind of like the hook in the introduction. And then you tell them the thing, which is like the body of the thing. That's like the meat of it, right? And then we tell them what we told them. So there's like a little conclusion or summary. So when you write a blog post that way, you can often pull the intro or pull the conclusion as like a straight teaser, which basically is like you use that and then you say, to get all of the details and get the transformation, whatever that transformation is, click on over and read my blog post, 5 ways to make content repurposing easier or something like that. So that's someplace you can go that you can always repurpose. And then the other one, and this is kind of more fun, I think, for most people, is the gem pull. And I use a gem emoji for this one to represent this, where you go through your blog post. And I like to use a highlighter. Like I'll sometimes print out my blog post because I'm old school, and I'll take a highlighter and I'll highlight like 10 different gems that are in there, just like little phrases or quotes or concepts that I'm talking about in there. Because remember, we're writing detailed posts. We're not writing a 3-paragraph flimsy blog post. If you do that, you're going to have a hard time doing this technique. But if you write content in the beginning that is worth repurposing, that's nice and rich in detail and whatnot, you should be able to identify a bunch of little gems in there. And then you can say, okay, of all these 10 things I highlighted, like here's 2 that I'm going to share this week as gems because I think these are the 2 best ones, or the ones that I am excited to write something about this week or something. And then you can pull out just that piece of gem and you can add a little bit to it if you want to, or you can just use it as is, or you can expand on it, whatever you want to do with that gem. So that's a way to actually think about repurposing in kind of a more methodical way, instead of just looking at your blog and thinking, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to repurpose this thing. So that's kind of like, that's a very high level. I teach more details in HLC, of course, but that's kind of like the approach to actually analyzing your blog and figuring out like, what can I share as a piece of micro content? So that's one thing I wanted to share,
I
tactically
really like
speaking.
that. And I think that tactic would help me with my mindset around the Instagram content. Like,
Mhm,
if I'm
mhm.
going to make one Instagram post for this,
Yep,
let's make it something so good and so juicy in the blog post that it makes people want to leave Instagram to go to that blog post and actually read it.
yep. If
Because
that's
I
your
don't want
goal.
to set up mini chats or anything like that for people to go
Mhm,
to those
yep,
things. So they're going to have to find that blog post on their own.
right.
Um, so
And I
yeah,
just
I
want to
think
say,
that I
like,
like that tactic
that would
for the
work with what
Insta.
you're describing. It would also work if your goal is to get them into your ManyChat funnel. It would also work if your goal is just to get them to follow you because you're doing a reel. Like different calls to action can work with this gem pull and straight teaser method. Although the straight teaser really is more about getting them over to the blog post, like you said. So, but the gem pull works for any kind of call to action. Yeah. All
I'm
right.
keeping myself on mute just in case my computer decides to duplicate YouTube again.
Okay. Keeping us on our toes, right? Okay, the other tactical thing that I wanted to share is, I forget what it was. I have to check and this is one that I really love using, and I know you do too, Heather, is listicles. So if you find that it's hard to go through and pull those gems out of your blog posts, one way to make it a lot easier is to use listicles. And a listicle is a list plus an article. So basically, it's like 10 ways to do this, or 10 steps to do this, or even just, I actually prefer 3 and 4. I'll do like 3 ways to blah, 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 4 steps to blah, 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 or something like that. And the title of your blog post doesn't even have to have a number in it if you don't want it to, for it to be a listicle. You can structure your blog post as a listicle if you want to, which later will make it easier to repurpose the gems. So I'll give you a quick example. Let's say you write a listicle that's like, 4 ways to cut sugar cravings and like, eat less sugar in your diet or something like that. That's not the best working title. We would come up with something a little more compelling and unique, but let's just say we were doing something like that. Or, how to, cut sugar by 50%, like, this season, as a, I don't know, like even if you have to bring, even if you're eating at restaurants because you travel a lot for work or something like that. Like I like to get really specific with the problems we solve in our content. So it would be something specific, but something around that. And then what you would do to do a listicle is when you're structuring your blog post, if it's a problem-oriented post, we think about 3 strategies or 4 strategies to share. So let's say you decide to share a strategy about using more spices in your food because, like, I don't know if you guys know this, but like certain spices like cinnamon and paprika fool our brains into thinking that we're getting sugar because they have kind of a sweet like essence to them. So a lot of my health coaches teach to like use more like cinnamon and stuff like that. So that could be one strategy you share. Another strategy you share maybe is adding certain foods to your diet, right? So maybe you talk about eating more fruit, eating more whatever, right? Um, and then another strategy might be like doing like having like a tapping script where you tap about like the types of foods that your body needs for nourishment and work on like your subconscious, feelings around sugar and whatnot and foods. Now, just as an aside, I would love to see that tapping script be something that you do in your coaching as a like get rid of sugar coach, because I like to make sure that at least 1 or 2 of the strategies in your blog post give you an opportunity to talk about what you do in your coaching and how you help people write tapping scripts in this example, right? So now you have these 3 things, and each one has their own header and a couple paragraphs, probably 3, 4, 5 paragraphs to describe the strategy. And now when you go to break it up into smaller posts, you can use each one of those strategies as like a problem solving or teaching kind of content post. Instead of having to like hunt around for different pieces, they're all right there already kind of like pre-written and broken up into smaller pieces of content that you can even break those up into smaller content now as well, right? So a way to think about that, Heather, would be now you want to go write a carousel post. You could write a carousel post that's like, these 4 strategies, like 4 ways to reduce sugar if you are, someone who travels for work a lot or whatever. Or you could, and maybe you bring like a packet of cinnamon with you on your travels. Or or you could also create a carousel about each one of those individual strategies you shared, right? So you're giving yourself lots of different options, but it's already like when you write a listicle, it's like already pre-organized into something that's going to be really easy to grab pieces of micro content from. So you don't have to write your blog post this way, but I'm a big fan of doing it that way. And I do teach that inside of HLC with most of my like blog post structures, because part of what we're doing in HLC is making sure we end up with a library that's easy to repurpose. And that's a really good way to make sure that what you do end up with is actually super easy to repurpose. So that's just like one tactic that people can try if they're finding that repurposing feels hard, specifically from blog posts. Whew, that was a lot. I hope it was clear.
That was a lot, but that was really good. And
Yeah.
I think both methods are really solid for repurposing. And it actually gives you what I was kind of discussing earlier, where you're not just reusing your content, but you're actually truly repurposing content from it.
Right.
And then what I would say is something I learned from this Amber gal. I only just downloaded something from her recently, but I've been seeing her content on Threads for a while.
Hmm,
Then I bought like a low ticket offer from her that was like a repurposing strategy.
nice.
It was like $20 or something. It was very helpful and insightful in this kind of thought process. I bought it because I was trying to help a client out.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh, this is going to be good for me too.
Yeah.
Um, but she was talking about that repurpose, recycle, reuse
Hmm.
philosophy. I can't remember exactly the 3 R's that she uses,
Hmm.
but giving you totally new stuff from your original and then reusing that again later. So you have it, like if you use a tool like Later to schedule your social media content, you have your historical content in there. You
Hmm.
could actually go back and pull it back out, duplicate it, and reschedule it again. And that's
Yeah.
something that I'm hoping to do as time goes out of my buffer
Hmm.
hub.
Yeah, that's good, is having it there so you can just go back and literally just reuse and
Re-edit.
or expand upon it a little bit if you want to, right?
Because, and Tomisha put
Mhm.
this in the chat a little earlier,
Hi, Tamisha.
um, repeating your content doesn't make you boring, it makes you money, Jana.
That's
She's
right.
quoting you.
Yeah. That's right. Repetition in your, yeah, repeating your content doesn't make you boring. It makes you money.
Yeah. And that's
That's,
actually a really good
I think I have that
tactic
pinned
to
on my,
use.
sorry.
Oh
I
no,
think I have
you need
that
to have
pinned
it.
on my Instagram. I think that post is pinned to the top of my Instagram.
Um, that's a really good tactic to use when you're feeling stretched for time and you don't have a lot of opportunity to create new content or repurpose content from
Mhm.
your existing long form. Right now, maybe you're in a month of rapid acceleration or growth, or you're
Mhm.
launching a new program, or you're reworking something. This is a really good opportunity for you to still show up on social
Mhm.
while not creating brand new stuff.
Yeah. Also, coming back to like hiring someone, um, I know one of the content repurposers that I know, the way she does things is like you give her like, the URLs for like 8 blog posts that you've written that you want repurposed into pieces of content.
Mhm.
And she delivers back the graphics, the captions, the quote graphics, like a bunch of stuff. And then you can just decide what you want to post when. So there are content
Mm,
repurposing VAs and social media managers and stuff that'll actually just post it for you. But there's also people who will pull out all the gems, get it all organized for you, and then it's in a folder. And so, you can go to the folder and be like, okay, I'm just going to schedule out some things for the next 2 weeks and just pull out what you want, get it scheduled and
I
go, and
like
then
that.
revisit the folder again. So
I was
like that's
actually just
another strategy to do, is to get some help, but also keep a little bit of agency over what gets posted when. You can do it that way if you want that.
I actually really like that, and I think I would prefer that methodology. I was just looking at Content by M,
Hmm.
her service packages the other day as I
Yeah.
was thinking
Yeah,
through, like,
that's not the person I'm talking about, but Emma is one of the ones that is great at it. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, I was looking at her services the other day. She's a little bit outside of my current budget right now, but I definitely could see myself hiring someone like her
Hmm.
and them just providing. But I also don't need, I think I was looking at her service and she's like, give me your content and I'll like give me a YouTube video and I'll write the blog post and like do all the repurposing from it too. I have the blog management part already in place, so I would just need the repurposing part. But in this instance, for us to actually make that work,
Hmm.
we would need the blog published
Hmm.
well, like way faster than what it's happening right now. So,
I was just on a call with an HLC student this morning. It was a bonus call because inside of HLC, once you've published 4 pieces of content, you unlock 2 bonuses. You get a repurposing lesson from me, a new one, and you also get a strategy call with me to talk about
nice.
amplifying and repurposing what you've written. And she was saying that she had written 15 blog posts. She's very prolific. She's been in HLC a couple months and she's written a lot. Again, she's the exception. She's not the same person I was talking about
Dang.
a few minutes ago, but she's another one of those people who gets into the program and just sets time, a lot of time aside to do it. And she got it done and she's got like
Yeah,
15. She already published half of them, and the other half are like pre-scheduled to go out every 2 weeks on her blog.
yeah.
And I asked her, I'm like, why are you having them go out every 2 weeks? And she was like, well, I just want to be consistent about publishing them. And we were really digging into it because she's launching her program next month and she wants to do like some interlinking of her blogs to help people binge on her blog content and stuff.
Yep.
And basically, I was kind of trying to get at the idea that like, I'm not sure you have to wait to publish them. I think as, something I say a lot too, Tamisha, write this down, um, is, you're not a blogger, you're a coach with a blog. Like those two things are very different. And I think
Yeah.
we get into this blogging thinking where we have to be publishing every week or every 2 weeks, and it's got to be consistently new things coming out. And if you're a coach with a blog and you're doing things my way, the HLC way, I'm not sure you need to really publish every 2 weeks. Like if you have a bunch of posts written, I would publish one today, one 2 days from now, one 4 days from now. I would even say publish them all today. I don't Love the idea of having the same date on all your posts. So maybe like, stagger them a little bit, but you don't have to wait
daily.
2 weeks. Um,
No,
so
if you're
just
writing that much content,
question.
like daily,
Yeah. So I mean, I just encourage people to like question like why you're doing it. Are you doing it because you think you're a blogger? If you're not a blogger, you're a coach of the blog, your goals are different. So you might not need to wait. Why did I get off on this
yeah.
tangent, Heather? What were you talking about that made me say
I was
this?
talking about hiring someone like Emma, to take my content and repurpose it. But for her, her
Oh,
methodology is taking a
right,
YouTube video, writing the blog, and then doing the repurposing stuff for
right,
socials.
right.
I would need to cut that middle part out for me. That's where you started.
So my question for you, I guess, is does she have to be repurposing the stuff you just created, or can you go back to like things you created 6 months ago and
Oh,
give
that's a
her
good
your like
point.
your most high performing 8 blog posts or your most high performing 8 YouTube videos or whichever. It doesn't have to be high performing. It could just be the ones that you feel like you want to be talking about again and use those instead of like the most recent ones. Like you don't necessarily have to hire someone to do that in real time. So this is just me like again saying like if you're not a blogger per se, but you got into that mindset because you were a blogger, you literally were a blogger, Heather.
Hmm.
Or you're a coach like my client who I was on the phone with this morning, my HLC student, but you
Yeah.
learned from people who are bloggers and you're taking that advice from bloggers. Like, do you really need to stagger them out, or could you just publish an evergreen library and then repurpose whatever you want whenever you want and not have to be always thinking like about publishing, repurposing, getting it all done in like a week's time and getting all that out there that corresponds to the blog that you just published. Like it doesn't have to be that way if you have an evergreen content library and your goal is to sell more of your own services or products and just get more people into your funnels.
Yeah. I honestly think that's actually a really good point for me, and it could be a good point for everyone else that's listening or that might listen, is if you've not been doing any repurposing, like I just started posting threads for my content that's coming out. There's so many pieces of content that we could repurpose that are not out of date, that are still very accurate, that
Right.
even could become pillar pieces of content that we could reuse later on, as long as things don't change. That could we could start with. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Hmm.
There's a treasure trove, quite
Hmm.
literally,
Yeah. Yeah.
inside of my business.
So it's interesting because very much like there's sort of like two extremes of a continuum that are both things that can get people stuck. The
Right.
first extreme of the continuum is you're not even publishing any long form content. And so when you go to try to repurpose, you don't have anything to really repurpose from, and it's blood from a stone. The other
Right.
extreme, and this is more what you're experiencing, Heather, is you have so many things you could repurpose that it's almost like hard to know where to start, or you feel overwhelmed, or you feel like we didn't repurpose the last 3 things. So let's just like you get kind of this feeling like this completist, like I didn't do it all with all of it. And now I'm failing because I'm not squeezing every drop that I could out of all this stuff. Right. So it's like
Yeah,
both of those are problems that people face. And in your case, it's probably more of I mean, there's some strategy involved, but there's like some mindset of like, it's okay if we don't repurpose every single thing right now, and we'll go back to Paris and go to the museums when we're ready, kind of thing. Um,
yep,
and just staying in action. And that's basically what you're doing. And I know you're doing that successfully because you're highly visible. So you don't have the problem where you're like not doing it. But I think you have the problem where you have a story in your head and you're beating yourself up a little bit for not doing it as much as you think you should be doing it.
for sure. Yeah,
Don't beat
for
yourself up,
sure.
girl. You're doing it. You're doing it all. Not all of it, but a lot of it. You're doing a lot and you're doing a lot
I'm
more than
doing a
everybody
lot.
else does.
I just want to do more.
Mhm. Yeah. And the only way
I
to do
want
more
to,
is at this point for you, the only way to do more is like you said, to outsource. You've got to
I
like get your
have to
team on
hire.
it if you're going to do more because
Yeah,
you're only one person.
yeah, I have to hire. And, as the company grows and scales, and as I get more reach and visibility, um, that that day will come where I can, you know, set that aside and hire someone to do that for me.
Yeah.
Um, and just have someone doing that thing. I think that's where I don't want to overly overload my current team with like, oh, can you do this? Oh, can you do that? Like I try to keep them within their
Yeah.
lane.
And you should, because when it comes to hiring in general, not with just with content repurposing or content, but
Mhm.
we always want to make sure we have our team on things that are like, income producing and stuff. So you do have to be careful. I mean, you don't want the voice in your head that tells you you have to squeeze every single drop out of all these pieces of content to
Yeah.
lead you in a direction where you pay people to do things that that you don't really need to get done in order to make money in your business, right? We don't want to have that happen either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that the solution there is really to remember that, like, for every piece of content you put out, long form content, you could repurpose 3 things, or you could repurpose 300.
Yeah.
And like any number in there is acceptable and fine. And there's always more we could do, but you also don't have to do all the things. Like none of us have to or should try to do all the things, right?
Yeah. For sure. Well, this has been helpful. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about?
I don't think so. I think I covered the strategies. We talked about starting with long form content so you're not trying to get blood from a stone. We talked about getting your mindset right, and we didn't get into that a lot. It could be a whole nother live about why people think, "Ooh, is it okay to repurpose? What if people think I'm
Mhm.
boring?" Remember, no one thinks you're boring.
Yeah.
Repeating your content doesn't make you boring, it makes you money. That's a whole nother live for another day.
Yep.
Thinking about the straight teasers and the gem pulls as the framework to find the pieces that you want to repurpose. What I teach inside of HLC, I shared that very high level version of what I teach in there. We talked about listicles, which basically set you or your team up to very easily be able to pull pieces out and repurpose. And we talked about like that continuum where, like, the other end of the side of the continuum is like you have so much to repurpose that you feel like you're always behind when you're really not. You're ahead because you're repurposing more than other people do from their content. Heather, you're not behind. You're ahead. You're doing so
Ooh,
much more than anyone else.
that is so good to know. I am not behind. I'm ahead.
Because if you think you're going to create 50 pieces from everyone, you're always going to be behind.
Oh my gosh. It's like I don't know why this popped into my head, but that that line from Ricky Bobby just popped in. If you're not first, you're last.
Oh, that's funny.
So I guess maybe that's my mindset, if that's what came to mind when you just said that. Like,
Right, right.
I'm
No, you're
not doing
doing
it
so
all,
good.
therefore I'm not actually making a difference. I'm last. So
Oh, yeah, that's the
I
thought.
gotta
That's not
rework that.
right, right. Exactly.
I gotta rewire that thought
Hmm.
out of my
Yep,
mind. We gotta get rid
yep,
of it.
yep,
Oh,
yep.
couple questions. I think Pinterest is broken. I don't know that that's true. It was working fine for me this morning. Maybe check on a different browser or internet, unless you're not talking about Pinterest just being online. And then Wanjuru says, thoughts on the 9 grid strategy for repurposing. Um, I don't have a lot of thoughts on the 9 grid on Instagram.
Yeah.
I think if you are active in other places and you're active in stories, I just generally don't have the same thought process around 9 grid being um like not worth it. I think a lot of people who are like active Instagram people are like, oh, I can't have a 9 grid because people are going to see the posts are really old and therefore they're going to think I'm out of business. Like, I just don't think that. I don't have that thought
Yeah.
process. So I
Right.
think if you,
Because we're not dependent on Instagram for our business. That's
right.
why we don't have that thought process. Right.
So Andrew, I think if you are not dependent on Instagram for your business and you're active in stories and you're posting there consistently and you're posting reels, but maybe they're not going to your feed, I think all of those things could be a good situation for 9 grid because that's what I was going to do.
Mhm.
I still want to post and pin a few main posts at the top of my grid that are like how to work with us, our freebies and the academy.
Mhm.
I actually even had Sonia make them like 6 months ago and I never put them up. Um, so yeah, I think a 9 grid in certain situations could be super helpful. The only thing you can do is try it and see what happens. And if you
Yeah.
feel like you are decreasing in traffic, sales, like whatever your measurement was prior to doing that, then
You can go
fine.
back. Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
yeah, I
think,
think you could take content and repurpose it and make it your 9 grid.
yeah. I like the 9 grid idea. I don't do it, but just because I don't I like
I like
repurposing
it
my
too.
content into carousels and things. But
Yeah.
I think a 9 grid can work for people, like you said, depending on whether you're active in other places and whatnot.
Mhm.
I do inside HLC, I have the 9 and 2 content pillar system. And I
Hmm.
have talked to students before who wanted to do a 9 grid and said, yeah, just make each one of those. Like basically, if you're going to do a 9 grid, make sure that your main messages,
Yep.
basically the things that people need to learn and hear and understand more deeply to be ready to buy are represented in those posts. And that's what my content pillar system is. It just happens to also be 9. So, but I guess my point is that just make sure that you've got the right strategic things in that 9 grid. And then, you can just leave it. And like you said, either do stories and reels that drive
Yep.
people back to your profile. And then the link in bio could be to where you want them to send up your email list or whatever. Um, just make sure you're really intentional about what you put in the 9 grid is the
Uh-huh.
is
Yeah.
my basic point here. Yeah.
Yeah. You want it to be like main offers, main downloads for email list,
Right.
um,
Yeah. I mean, that's another way to think about it.
myths, mistakes, things that are going to help people get
Right.
over the hump to actually work with you.
Right. Things that make
I'm
you,
assuming you're a coach at this point, and that might not be true. You could be like a content creator of some sort, and
Mhm.
um, your strategy might be slightly different. But this is what I was going to do for my 9 grid strategy was, Pinterest mistakes that people make,
Mhm.
myths that people believe around Pinterest, the
Mhm.
services we offer, the freebies, the YouTube channel, the academy, about me. Like those were going to be mine.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the question was about how it relates to repurposing. And I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head right there. Like if you were to go to create a 9 grid today and it was from scratch, not the one that you already have in the wings, you would
Yep.
be repurposing for a lot of that because you'd be going and getting the language from the like for the about me from somewhere where you've written that before, getting the language for the myths from a blog post that you wrote about, main Pinterest mistakes that people make or whatnot. I mean, the mistakes, sorry. So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good use of repurposing. And it's a smart use of repurposing if the content you're repurposing from to begin with is like high conversion friendly, like the kind that we teach. So yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a good use of repurposing, I think.
Thoughts
Yeah.
are formulating. I think that does it for today. I was just gonna go look,
Yeah,
but
it's a
I'm
long one.
afraid to on YouTube. I'm afraid to touch it because my computer is like, so I'm 3 updates behind on
Oh,
my computer.
oh,
One of them took 8 hours to download yesterday and then it updated overnight, but I still have 2
oh,
left. And I think that's part of what's happening is my computer is like so crippled from the backlog of updates that it just keeps doing weird things.
oh.
So anyways, I clicked mute site on YouTube, so hopefully it doesn't do it again. But next week we are talking about uh
We're still on the topic of content
content
repurposing.
repurposing. Yeah.
Yeah. So next week we're actually going to do like an example of a breakdown. So I'm going to like
Hmm.
basically bring a blog post and say like, here's what here's how I'm breaking down all these different pieces into different pieces and for what platforms and things. So just
Yep.
just as an example of what's possible. So we'll do
Yeah.
that next week. And in the description for this video, I'm also linking to a blog post that I have about 5 ways to make content repurposing easier. Some of them are ways we talked about today and they go a little deeper. And there's a few others in there that we didn't touch on today at all because there's lots of good ways to make it easier.
Yeah. And I am super excited for that topic as well, because obviously that's going to help me think through this process. So I think
Yeah.
you all have a good idea of content repurposing thoughts and where we're going to go next week. I hope to see you all back here then with me and Jana, and hopefully my computer will be fixed and Jana
We'll
won't be,
see. We'll be on the other side of the hurricane.
yeah, she'll on the other side of the hurricane.
Yeah.
Yeah, all will be well.
Yeah. See
Okay,
everybody next week.
bye. Oh my gosh. I literally only have one Chrome tab open and it's this YouTube Chrome tab. The live